Hello and welcome back. Today we are talking about analyzing and interpreting qualitative data. So, 6 steps in analyzing and interpreting qualitative data. First of all, you're going to prepare the data for analysis. Then you're going to explore the data through coding. You're going to use those codes to develop description and themes. You'll represent the findings through narratives and visuals, perhaps visuals, but always narratives. You'll make an interpretation of the meaning of those findings. And most likely, you're going to be using some strategies to validate the accuracy of your findings. So I'm going to go a little bit quickly through these slides because there's a lot of them, and I want to, give you some examples as well. And so here's just a uh, diagram of that process. So first of all, organizing the data. With a small study, this may not be as critical, but with a large study, it becomes very important. And that is basically your material should be organized. So you might even make a list or a table of, okay, who did we interview? When did we interview them? And what is their role? Something like that. So, like a list of the interviews, a list of the documents that you have collected, a list of the dates for the field notes that you have, that kind of thing. And all of that stuff needs to live somewhere. And it's definitely recommended that you have duplicate copies of your raw data, of your materials, because things happen, and we wouldn't want you to lose your data and lose your work. Okay, for interviews and when you're observing interactions, often you'll have an audio file for that, right? And that will need to be transcribed so that it can be analyzed, okay? And I'm going to talk a lot about analyzing transcriptions because that's the most common form of data file that we have in qualitative research. And finally, you're going to prepare the data for either hand analysis, and usually that means printing out the transcripts, or computer analysis. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So, transcribing the data. Transcription is the process of converting audio recordings or field notes into text data. So, audio recordings, either you transcribe it yourself, which is most common for students, or you send it out to a service. Field notes, if they were notes that you wrote by hand, typing them up. You consider how you're going to do it, whether you're going to use software, whether you're going to use a professional transcriptionist like one of the services that you could send out to, or you're going to transcribe yourself, whether you're going to do it word for word or just do kind of like the gist in each part of the interview, with the idea that you would go back later and transcribe in more detail those things that really relate to your question. It takes approximately 4 hours to transcribe 1 hour of audio, and this varies depending on how fast a typist you are, but it does take quite a bit of time. So, if you're transcribing interviews, give yourself plenty of time to do it. And so this list just has some tips for transcribing audio recorded interviews. Okay, now you're either going to analyze by hand or by computer. Now, um, the there's different levels. Okay, there's by hand or the kitchen table method, as it's sometimes called. And this is when you print out the transcripts, right? So they're actual physical piece of paper in front of you. And you have a whole bunch of sets of highlighters, you have post-its, you've made multiple copies of your transcripts. And that's how you're segmenting or chunking and then writing the codes. Okay. And you'd use hand analysis if you prefer not to use software, if you want to be close to the data. And also, it all takes time. So, but yeah, and sometimes, like, actually having the pieces of paper right there in front of everybody on the table can be very useful when you're coding with a partner or with a group. Now, there's also computer analysis of qualitative data, and there's qualitative software. Um, you could you in There's okay, so there's hand analysis with the paper and the markers, but you could also use Microsoft Word as kind of your virtual paper and virtual highlighters, and use the review function where you can put comments in order to code. Okay, so that's like a slight step up from using the paper. But here we're talking about using qualitative data analysis software, sometimes called QDA software. And it can facilitate the process of storing the data, of analyzing, of sorting it, of representing it, or even of visualizing it. You'd use software if you have a large database, if you are trained in that software, or you think you can figure it out or get training. If you have the resources to purchase or locate the software, it can be quite pricey, if not. And and if you need close inspection of the words, although I would argue you have close inspection of the words in either case, as long as it's a verbatim transcription. Okay, so the using qualitative data analysis software, it tries to mimic what you would do with paper, right? So there are ways to organize your files. Um, you would select a program and then import your files into the software. And then once they're in the software, there's ways that it organizes it for you in a way. There are always ways to mark the sentences or segments or chunks, and then code those chunks or blocks or segments. And then you can also do searches, which is makes it uh, easier when you're using data analysis software, and it may facilitate collapsing the codes into broader themes and more features. Okay, so there are some specific programs available, and different programs have different, these are different apps, right? They have different benefits, drawbacks, different, people swear by one or the other. I want to let you know that recently Augusta University has made in vivo available to students and faculty. Okay, so that is available to all students and faculty. Um, and yeah, that makes it very handy. So first, we talked about exploring to get a general sense of the data. All right. So in with qualitative data, and again, it's mostly transcripts, you're reading through the field notes, you're reading through the interview transcript several times just to get a sense. And you might write notes to yourself, or what's called memos in the margins of the interviews, your field notes or the images. These are just your initial reflections. Memos capture your reflections, your thoughts about what you're reading. Okay? They're a little bit different from codes, right? The codes are saying, okay, this segment is about X. The memo is what you think about what you just read. Okay? So for coding, you're starting with one document. You're asking yourself, what is this person saying? This person saying, right? You're identifying the segments, and then you're assigning a code. Now, what's a code? It's one, two, or three words that describe what's being said. It could be the participant's actual words, and that's called an in vivo code. It could be terms from the literature. Maybe you're being guided by a theoretical framework and you want to use terms from that framework. It and also it's um we recommend that you practice lean coding. That is, try to have no more than 10, 50, 15, maximum 20 codes that you're using, or else it gets kind of unwieldy to manage. Okay, and then after you've done your initial pass of coding, you're going to go back and see, okay, are there any of these codes that duplicate ideas? Because you want to reduce it down to a manageable list. Um, um, you may go back to the data. It may be that toward the end you discover that there's something going on that you weren't really quite as aware of at the beginning. So you might go back to the data and say, oh, let me see if I can find more examples of why. Okay, and you'll be looking for supporting quotes along those lines, supportive quotes along those lines. So I want to show you, this is from um, the Michael Searles interview, and Michael Searles is a notable figure in Augusta, Georgia, and he is known as Cowboy Mike, and he is an educator, and he's taught uh, many children and adults around Augusta about black cowboys, the history of black cowboys. Okay, so this is from an interview of Michael Searles. And so this is in, let me make this smaller so you can see what I'm in. Oops, not that, this. Let me minimize that. Okay, this is actually in vivo. Okay, um, I I downloaded it from the university source and installed it, and I've opened it up and I've imported this a transcript of his interview, which is available from the CSRA Oral History Archive. Okay, so I have this transcript of his interview. And so let's say that one of the codes that I know that he's going to talk about is his own background. And so I've created a code called background. Let's put in another code. They call them nodes. Okay. Let's say there's going to be another, I know from reading through that there's going to be another um, node about doing public history. Yeah. Let's just look at those two. So this one I've already done. What I did was I highlighted the text, and then I you can drag it. I clicked that it was background. So you see here on the side, see that pink line? It's saying what code is associated with that text right there. Here, let's see what's going on here. Let me make this a little bigger so you all can see what I'm doing. A little better. Okay, so the researcher asks, the researcher says, I know they call you Cowboy Mike, and tell us why. Is it related to your specialization, maybe? And Cowboy Mike replies um, that Quite a few years ago, maybe it's 30 years ago, I started doing research and discovered there were black cowboys. I had been teaching black history for a long time, but didn't really know much about black cowboys. And once I discovered there were black cowboys, I began to do research, collect materials, artifacts, and various items. And I affected a cowboy dress. I got my cowboy hat, bought some cowboy boots and working clothes, etc. And so I think we need another code. I'm gonna right click. Oh, it lets me code in Vivo. No, 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 I don't want that whole thing. Code. New node. I right clicked, hit code, new node. I think this, if I were to say he says he discovered, right? Discovered there were black cowboys. Call this discovered there were black black cowboys. I'm taking the name of that node directly from what he said. Okay. So you see the it shows here on the side, that pink line shows that it has assigned this new node to um, this segment of text or this chunk. Okay. All right. And then I want to show you, I told you there was going to be part on doing public on, there's going to be a part on doing public history. Okay. Ba, 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 ba. Okay. I think there's another form of teaching. This is, Michael Cyril says, Dr. Cyril says, I think there's another form of teaching that's less formal and sometimes called public history. When I would go out into the communities and I would go to elementary schools or middle schools or high school, universities and talk about the Black past and talk about African Americans in the West, this was a way of addressing the public. Okay. And I also used to speak to citizen associations and various citizenship groups, senior citizens, etc. And again, talk with them about and share with them about this history. They were not taking a formal class and they weren't taking it for, oops, it slid down too far. And they weren't taking it for credit. Um, and so, hold on. But again, a way of as broadening their historical understanding. Okay. And let's say I think that's where that segment ends. Can I drag it? Yes, I think yes. That's one of the nice things about in vivo. I can drag it over to the name of the node or code and just drop it. Um, and in vivo gives it that code discovered. Wait, I gave it the code discovered there were black cowboys. Oops, that was a mistake. I meant for it to be um, coded doing public history. So let me click on this. Hold on. Okay, I think I got that. Going up here to code. Wait, let me right click. code. Where is delete code? Uncode, uncode. Yeah, yeah, there it is. Okay. There's uncode. Uncode. Ah, wait. No, I don't know what happened there. Okay, clearly I don't know in vivo well enough. This is only my second time using it. Okay. But presumably, if I were better at it, I would be able to delete that code that's associated with that segment of text and change change it to the code that I want. Okay, so I'd be able to get rid of that segment. Uncode. Nope, not what I expected. um, yes, yeah. All right, but you get the gist. You get the gist of what I'm doing here, right? So then, um, what you end up with is a collection of segments, a collection of chunks that all have the same code. Okay, and you try to summarize what the participant is telling you or participants are telling you in that collection of codes. All right, so let's go back to our slides. And those summaries are called themes. I'm on slide 16. Those summaries are called themes. So there's a theme um, throughout the transcript. If you read the whole thing, there's a theme about giving back to the community through performing this history, okay, through educating people about this history. All right. There's another theme where he talks about people's reactions to his, um, um, to, him teaching them about uh, uh, black cowboys. Okay. Um, Yes. And there may even be a theme about how, like the scope of his influence, in terms of how many people he was able to reach, how he's able to get the word out, how he's able to communicate history to the public at large. Okay, now sometimes the themes are the ideas the participants most frequently discuss. Sometimes it's those ideas that are unique or surprising. Sometimes you're looking for, okay, well, what do I have the most evidence to support? Okay. Um, yeah, to support the theme. And this is particularly important when you're uh, when you're trying to make recommendations to an organization. You want to make recommendations based on something that you have a lot of evidence around. Um, Sometimes you have a theoretical framework, and there are certain things you expect to find, and these are the things you're going to highlight. Now, just there's also descriptions, right? So we saw um, there was a description of what his educational background was. There may be descriptions of a person's early life. There may be descriptions that describe, for example, the history of a particular school, or describe the students in general terms who attend that school. Okay, there are certain times where they're not talking so much about your phenomenon of interest, but they're giving a description about something. And it may be related to your phenomenon of interest, but it may also be related to just kind of the background, the context that you're in. Okay. And so, Mini pages become mini segments, may become 40 to 60 codes, which hopefully you're going to reduce to 20 or so, 20 to 30 codes, which will come out to be maybe 5 to 7 themes, okay, for your typical study. All right, that's a sample page. Um, so how do you use the codes to build description and themes? It varies. Okay. Some studies, the themes are really going to be grow out of the data. Okay. Some studies, particularly that are more open-ended, the themes are going to really grow out of the data. Sometimes you're working with some kind of theoretical or conceptual framework. Okay. And so you're looking for those things that are described in that framework. Okay. Sometimes, particularly with smaller studies, you're just looking for those things that are going to answer your research question. And if it's a very specific research question, you're looking for those very specific things. You know, maybe it would be the impact of a teacher on students. And so when he's talking about being written up in the newspaper, you're going to skip over that and just be looking for, okay, where is he talking about his impact on students? Um, and you're trying to, generally speaking, in qualitative research, you're trying to form an in-depth understanding of a central phenomenon. So your themes want to hopefully would show different aspects of that central phenomenon. So description, what is it? There are different types of themes. Um, yeah. And okay, layering and interrelated themes. Sometimes the way your themes evolve, um, there has to be an evolution process, right? Because you may have 40 or 60 codes. Um, you may have a couple dozen pages of transcripts. Um, and so they're layering may be a way that you organize these themes or organize the codes to become themes, right? So what are some of the kind of minor things? Okay, there are certain things that are minor, okay? That, yeah, they happened, but wasn't really wasn't really important to the central story. Then there are major things. Maybe they're major events or major people or things that are major that are a real big part of the story that is emerging. And then from those major themes, from those major codes. So you have those might have minor things that happen from those major events. Okay, maybe there are a few different major events. You might have a broader theme that emerges. Themes could be interconnected. Okay, and generally we're working upwards toward a broader levels of abstraction. Okay, may have codes, then categories of codes, then themes that emerge from those codes, then broad perspectives or implications. And then there may be themes that are interrelated because maybe they're interrelated because of chronology. Here are the things that happen in the beginning of the school year. Here are the themes that emerge toward the middle. Here are the themes that emerge as we're wrapping the school year up. Okay, it may be it's not just the date on the calendar, but there's a specific sequence of events, or maybe that there's a theoretical or conceptual model that you're working from. So you can use a table, um, and one, yeah, so usually most qualitative software, you can export your lists of segments and codes and their codes, okay, into basically an Excel spreadsheet where you have the quote, okay, the chunk, and then what codes are associated with that chunk. Okay. It might be a hierarchical tree because it may be that a tree diagram kind of shows the themes and how they're connected. It might be some kind of other diagram. It may be some kind of a flow chart. Um, the reason in vivo uses this term nodes, often when you see the conceptual frameworks that emerge out of qualitative research, there are these interconnected circles, right? So these nodes that are connected. Could be a drawing, the map of a physical layout of a site, or the map or a picture of a metaphor that relates to your topic. And then finally, you should often there's a table of demographics on the individual participants or research site, and that's usually background. That's or description. Um, yeah, it's usually straight, and it's usually presented pretty early in your like in your methods section. Here's who I interviewed, for example. Here's a table, the table format of an example of a table format. Um, Here, this they must have been exploring gender. They were exploring gender and they're looking at professionalism, right? So we have some female quotes about professionalism and some male quotes about professionalism. All right, and they have a table to represent this information. Um, Tables are not big in qualitative research. All right, so I might have this as part of my analytic process, right? So I'm going to make the, I might create tables if I'm contrasting two groups, perspectives, for example. But then I'm going to take this and I'm going to write it into text. And here's a sample demographic table. The names of the, well, usually pseudonyms of the participants, maybe something about their background, like their years teaching, their gender, what level of class are they teaching, in a high school, let's say, their approach, some things to give, to orient the reader as to who is saying what. Okay. As you're reporting your findings, you're going to report your themes. Okay, so you're going to say, we identified three or four or five main themes in our participants' descriptions of how they do public history, right? First, they talked about the importance of history for the importance for history for citizens in a democracy or something like that, right? Knowledge of history for citizens, the importance of knowledge of history for citizens, right? And then you would give some quotes related to that, okay? Some of the segments related to that. You would write in detail. You want to present all your main themes, and you also want to mention, usually this is saved for after you've presented your main themes, any contrary evidence that you found. Maybe there was something you didn't expect to find. Maybe there was one person who disagreed with everyone else and had a different perspective. Any tensions and contradictions. If you do have dialogue, maybe you did a focus group, maybe you did observations and you have notes where there was a conversation, that can be used as well. Okay, but basically you're describing what you learned from your participants. Okay, and then here's just some examples of forms of a narrative discussion. So, interpreting the findings, summarizing what you found out, including personal reflections about the meaning of the data, comparing the findings with the literature, okay, addressing the limitations, and then making suggestions either for future research or in the case of doing action research, you're making suggestions for what can be done in a particular setting or context or about a particular problem. Okay, so you're summarizing, you're saying, this is what I found out, this is what my participants said. Okay, this is what I think about it from my personal perspective, and this is what the literature says about it. Okay. However, I didn't ask blah, blah, blah. You might, have some kind of limitation to your study, or I was only there for a short time is a common one. Nonetheless, I suggest that in the future, blah, 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 blah. Okay. There are different ways of validating the accuracy of your finding. And if you look at the example in your textbook, the Mother's Trust in Principles case study, there you can see what the authors did. If you read through their methodology section, you see what they did, okay? And you see that there's a concept mapped, okay? And then and how they reported the findings. So I definitely encourage you to read as many articles related to your topic as possible that use a qualitative approach. Okay, because it's really by reading examples of other people's work that you get a sense of how to do it yourself. All right. I hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.